All right, ladies and gentlemen, so we're into part two here, having had a discussion about Born to Be Wide over the past 10 years. I thought it would be good to sort of stick with the whole aspect of what's happened in the wider music business over the past 10 years, because quite a lot has changed. A lot of the things that we take for granted now and we think are really part of everyday music life have really changed a lot. And two people that have been at it as long as I have, David Balfour and Dave Corbet. So the two Daves. I think maybe I should call you Dave and you David. And
I'm good with that.
That'll keep things simple. So David and I used to work together with Brody. In fact, David even lived through the period of record company excess, as has been popularized by Kill Your Friends, but he was always one of the calmer, mild-mannered people in that age, and they can give you a good perspective on how things have changed. But I suppose one good way to start is really to have a look at, how things were 10 years ago. And, Dave, what would you say was the kind of norm in the recorded music business? Recorded music business. I'm starting already. Yeah. I'm gonna have a drink of water. What was the norm if you were in a band? I mean, would you look to get signed? A record company would throw a ton of cash at you, and you'd probably never recoup it, but you wouldn't have to give it back.
I kind of had to get my notes out to remind myself where we were 10 years ago, and it was really, really interesting just to do a bit of research about it, because 2004 was more or less the last days of the big, dominant, major label record industry, when it was comfortable and when it was making an awful lot of money. And it was just really interesting to look back to where we were then. Like 10 years ago, there were no 3G mobile phones. That was launched in 2004. There was no iTunes. That was launched in 2004. So we were still in the days when the record companies were dominant. They decided what you listened to. There was more or less no other ways for artists to get their music out there except for getting a record deal. And it was a completely different picture from where we stand today.
Dave, what about in the live industry? Were there certain things that you could take for granted then that have changed now?
I think in 2004, it was the beginning of a kind of peak in live music, which probably went sort of 2004, 2006, and through to 2008. 2006 being a peak, and then 2008 being reaching the other side of that. And it became certainly cooler to go to a live gig. Live gig, you talk about leisure pound, and people were choosing to spend their leisure pound on going to live music. Live music became a much more essential part of people's lives generally, I think. And we saw a real upsurge in ticket sales. From T in the Park, we got to the stage where we're selling out in advance. Whenever we put a ticket out there, it's sold out straight away. And we really kind of hit a real stride where it became easier to promote a live show because people were really open to it and up for it. I think the one thing that's changed specifically since then is the way that which you tell people about a live gig, and because, as you say, there was no iTunes, social media wasn't really as dominant as it is now, and all that kind of stuff. So there's much more of a traditional way of telling people. Newspapers were still important, and they're not anymore. There was the kind of the radio advertising, all the kind of things you'd done in the past, posters you had to get them out there, all those kind of things. You were still promoting in a traditional way, but the audience had grown, and there was much more interest in going to see live music in particular.
And why do you think there was so much interest? I mean, was it higher than it had been in the 90s, or was there something that changed in Britain or in society in general that caused this huge enthusiasm for live events?
I think it started a little bit with people having a little bit more disposable income. If you look in Edinburgh in particular, one of the things that really sort of happened around that time was the growth of the banking industry in Edinburgh. It was very big. And there was an awful lot of young professional people who had lots and lots of disposable income who were prepared to go out midweek as well as weekends, not just do the sort of traditional clubbing thing. And they were looking for a good experience. And live music has always been a great experience. And so it was an easily affordable, more or less guaranteed good night out. So it suddenly became a very sort of easy thing to do, easy thing to get involved in, and a cool thing to be involved in. So it just took off in that sort of way. And I think, things have success breeds success, and the more people went, the more people had a good experience, they wanted to go back and repeat that and take other people that they knew to that kind of thing. So it gathered a bit of pace.
Dave, as the record companies the big record companies start to cut back and lay people off and save money, I mean, what were the noticeable effects of that? What were the wider repercussions?
I think there was a period of real fear. I mean, I started in the record business in 1996, and I went to a college in Bathgate, and 10 of us moved to London at the same time. Most of us got jobs in record companies, and then suddenly everyone was losing their jobs left, right, and centre. We'd started in a period of massive money. We were getting flown all over the world, put up in fancy hotels, and all the rest of it. And then Napster came along. Everything changed as broadband started to come through. Record sales plummeted, and the whole system that had been making so much money since the 60s and the 70s just completely started to collapse. So 2004, you're in a period of complete fear. We don't know what's happening. Napster has completely stolen our business. Everyone's losing their jobs. A lot of people were quite happy about that because they saw the record industry as evil and on the take and charging too much. But it produced so much uncertainty because we weren't at the point then when people were working out, oh, this is actually an opportunity for musicians and there's things we can do with this and we can release our music and, hey, record companies, we don't even need you. So back then it was kind of scary. I think I'm about the only person I know who worked in the record industry then who still does it now. So, but as I could say, loads of opportunities came out of it in time.
And do you think there was a period, you mentioned iTunes being launched in Europe in 2004, or rather iTunes Store, because the software existed before, but, Facebook 10 years ago. At which stage do you think things started to turn or settle?
What was funny is you went from a period where everyone bought CDs and maybe didn't like the price of it, but accepted that was all you could do. And then Napster came along and everyone just nicked everything. Like 10 years ago, in the early days of the internet, most people were just starting to get broadband, and websites, for the most part, were pretty rubbish. There wasn't YouTube or video streaming or anything like that. But what you did have was Kazaa and SoulSeek and sites like that. And everyone went, I know what to use the internet for. I'm going to nick music. And in some ways that was very destructive and disruptive, but it produced a whole new way of thinking about it. And sooner or later, people realized, well, it's not just a question of nicking music off these evil record companies, but this actually provides opportunities to put things back up and to send music to other people that didn't exist before, when you had to get a deal, do all the stuff, do the press. Then suddenly the idea emerged that, I'm a musician, I'm actually pretty good at what I can do, and I can just bypass this entire system, put it on the net, and find fans all over the world. So that's actually immensely empowering.
So is that MySpace then that kind of broke through that?
I think MySpace was the first sort of big consumer platform where people realised they can do that, and it's funny to think it's not even here anymore because it was such a powerful thing at the time, and it was a really energizing thing for music because people could just go straight out there and find fans. It was great.
As a promoter, Dave, I mean, obviously on the surface of it, you're putting on gigs. There shouldn't really be too much of a difference, as long as people want to go and see gigs. But with the decline in the fortunes of the big record companies, did that have an impact on you in that they would stop providing the investment for artists to go on tour in Britain or provide tour support or buy tickets for the gigs?
I think in terms of the gigs that were happening and what's happened now between then and now is that the pressure for the live music to generate income for the artist is now massive. That's like, and because of that, as a promoter, I'm suddenly coming up against lots of other people who want to get a piece of the pie and get a share of it, and then you get things like 360 deals, which everybody talks about. There's no such a thing as a 360 deal. There is a deal that an artist does and some of the record labels do to try and make sure that they get a piece of everything that the artist is involved in. And in some cases that's fair because they're putting everything in to make that happen, so they're expecting everything out of it a little bit. But as a promoter, from my point of view, we found ourselves really having to push back and go, actually, no, you're not getting a piece of that. This is us. This is what we do with the artist. We're paying the artist. Our relationship is direct with the artist. And there was the rise of a little bit at one point of the record labels actually trying to be the agent for the artist and bypassing the traditional agent and everything. And you were talking to somebody at the record label who thought they knew what they were talking about live-wise, and you had deeply frustrating conversations where you're going, you absolutely don't have a Scooby what you're talking about, but I'm going to have to deal with you because you're the person who's saying you're representing the artist anymore. And I had several conversations with artists going, you really do need to get a proper agent. Oh, well, no, this guy's like, no, but you need to have somebody who actually understands what they're doing, because all these people are basically record company people who are desperate to try and get involved in it, and are getting involved in it with no experience and no understanding of what it's really like to develop an artist, and coming up with nonsense stuff that us as a promoter are having to fight against.
It was a total power shift, really, because 10 years ago or more, the gig was something you did effectively to sell the record, and then the bottom fell out of the record business and the big gig became the main event. So like you say, the record industry was desperate to get in on it, but didn't have a clue what they were doing.
And you had this sort of stupid thing that went back and forward about where we'd get lied to on a regular basis about, the record will be out before the tour is. So as a promoter, what you want is the record to be out, getting a little bit of airplay on radio, and that'll help you build ticket sales and all that stuff. And the record label's thinking, right, we'll save a bit of money here. What we'll not do is we'll wait for the artist to tour and use that to help us sell the records. So you get lied to saying the record's going to be released on such and such a date. You build the tour, you put it on sale, all that kind of stuff, and then the record release date would come and go, and you'd be ringing the people going, what's going on? And the agent often had been lied to too, and they go, I've absolutely no idea. They're literally not returning my phone calls. And everybody from the record label wouldn't even reply to your emails, wouldn't send you a photograph of the band, wouldn't send you anything at all because they didn't want to talk to you about it. And they also didn't want the artist to get pressed. They wanted to wait until the record was out, which was now going to be after the tour, and use all the tour press and all the other bits to sell it. So we were actually selling their business. Then they turned around and said, and we'd like a piece of the money from the artist, from the live bit as well. To which my reply was generally,
so, you're allowed to swear, by the way.
Fuck off.
And there's an interesting point, though, because surely the way things have shifted now to an extent as well is the Live Nation is working as a record label, so you've got the same thing happening or taking charge of the release for the likes of Madonna. There's other big artists as well, and I don't mean just in the reference to that, but also who's actually breaking or developing the acts. I mean, is it safe to say that 10 years ago it was usually the record company or in some cases a publisher, but now it's just as likely to be an agent or a promoter that's getting behind an artist?
Yeah, I mean, the Live Nation model is has some good and bad points to it, but what we lost, and both the record industry lost as well as the live industry lost, was planning, control, a plan. We just lost the plan. There was no plan anymore. It was all about desperately trying to make little bits of money wherever you could. There was no plan to the way that an artist was being presented, put out there, marketed, set up. The tour was part of everything. Nobody was talking to each other. Everybody just stopped. And where Live Nation actually came in quite rightly, and where they have got it right, is that it's like, let's try and get everybody, the venue, the record label, the tour management company, everybody involved in a plan for the artist for the future. And that's actually a positive thing. That's actually really good for everybody, for the artists and for everybody, large or small. I know there's also suspicion about having full control over everything, like companies like Live Nation having full control over everything. But actually there is some value in there as well.
Is that not the same, though, as a record company having that 360 thing? So
yes, but I mean, but everything the record label, and I'm not. It's when 360 deals came out, everybody was like, "Oh, they're terrible. They're kind of wrapping the whole lot." Some were, some weren't. Some are actually really quite sensible in that what it's about is making sure that everything has a plan. It's all coordinated. Everybody's got it all together to put it right, and that's a good part of it all. where it becomes a bad part of it all is when there's over control and the person who's the worry or the risk is that if there's one person in control, if they're a numpty, then obviously everything's just going to go to shit. So
You can never underestimate the importance of a great manager, and maybe in the old days that was mostly about trying to control the record company.
I've witnessed this even in the days where record companies were making enormous pots of cash, that you could have one weak link in the whole chain and it could screw up the whole release schedule, or it could actually seriously harm an artist's career. With the managers, I guess that's something where, from what I can see, the role has changed quite a lot, and where also managers they've been affected by the fact that in the past they get 20% off a fat advance and that would keep them going, whereas now that's not necessarily the case, so they have to seek other ways of funding their work.
Being a manager is a very, very tough and usually thankless job, and the ones who do it well are absolutely amazing, especially now that the sources of income are so fragmented that you have to look everywhere for your income that's going to keep you going, and it's really immensely challenging, but people have managed to deal with it and find ways.
Are there any examples that you can see of managers actually embracing new things or having new models that are working out for them? How's the role of a manager changed?
Just about every manager now has to think in a different way. I think it's a completely different environment. What it used to be is the traditional thing of a record label advancing and you had the control of the label. I think as you were saying right at the beginning, when it all started to go horribly wrong, everybody just had a very negative view about it. Oh, it's all gone wrong, it's terrible, it's a mess, and all that kind of stuff. Whereas actually the people who did well in the end were the people who went, well, it's kind of an opportunity. Let's look at it in a different way. Yes, the sales money's not going to come in this way. How else can we make it come in? And a sensible, one of the really good things that I can see happening now is, in reality, what the record label used to do is just fund the artist. The artist used to come to them as effectively, we're a small business, we'd like you to help us grow into being a big business. That's a bit cold, but that is kind of what it was about, really. And now it's kind of a manager who's got any nous about them will look at it and go, okay, what I need is funding to get to where I would get my project to where I want it to be. And what's good now is that instead of being constrained to the label where maybe half the people you're working with you think are good and the other half you think are idiots and you don't really want to work with them, now you can go out and pick all the people you want to work with them. I'll work with him as a publisher, I'll work with him as a radio planner, as a radio plugger, all that kind of stuff. You can pick your team and you pay them, and all you're really looking for is finance, and you can get that finance from all sorts of sources, from the bank to venture capital people to possibly a record label or anywhere, really.
I think an example for me that was really telling was Simon Fuller, who managed the Spice Girls that I worked on. He was making tons of money from records, but was always looking beyond that. He was always looking at the film, the branding, the Pepsi sponsorships, and all these other activities that you could do to build your artist and create income and a name for them.
Shame the film was so piss awful.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we won't give the Spice Girls much artistic credit, but what he was doing was understanding that, there's so many different sources of doing this and building an artist, and it's a really evil word to have to say, but it is a brand. And it's not just about selling records or just about doing gigs. It's about having a presence in all kinds of different ways and finding different kinds of fans and hopefully, at the end, making a living out of it.
So at which point do you think things start to really turn in this direction where record companies like BMG, the big German record company which sold its recorded music stake to Sony and then set itself up as a rights management company, and in many ways doing the same thing, but just doing it in a slightly, putting a slightly different spin on it. I mean, do you think was there a particular turning point where people started to perceive things differently?
To be honest, I'm not sure they've worked it out yet, actually. I think it's a process of change all the time, and the big record labels are sometimes good at what they do, but it's often by controlling the market rather than being particularly creative or interesting, and it's usually the managers who do the really, really interesting stuff, and the record industry, as it still exists on the top scale, is pretty formulaic,
Do you have any sort of recollections of horrendous incompetence or excess going back 10 years ago? I mean, were there any spectacularly bad things that you saw people getting away with just because there was so much money flying around?
So many. I mean, it's hard to know where to start. I think...
It's all right for you. You were getting all the money. I'm still being the promoter. I didn't see fuck all.
The mention eluded me, unfortunately. But when I started, it was possible for a guy in a record company to have a pretty senior job, more or less, because they were good at telling jokes and they were good fun in meetings. And that really existed. And, and there were all kinds of excesses all over the place. Because everyone was making so much money, no one really gave a shit. You know what I mean? That has completely changed now. People really have to be able to pay their way, but there was so many things going on.
Yeah, there was instances of staggering ineptitude. It was just I mean, when you're trying to, people who just didn't know what was going on at all. You'd be talking to somebody who's supposed to be senior in the record label, but actually wasn't aware that the band was actually on tour at that particular moment in time. You're like, yes, they're on tour. Are they? I actually, had that kind of conversation. Yeah, they fucking are. Is there any chance I can get a poster or some kind of promotion behind the tour? Oh yeah, fuck yeah. Ooh. And that was kind of it. You just don't get anything else out of it. And it was just because, like you say, that their job, as far as they were concerned, was to meet the band somewhere around lunchtime, spend most of the afternoon with them getting absolutely slaughtered, take a whole pile of cocaine to keep them going for the rest of the evening, and end up in some kind of shady hotel room with somebody they didn't really know at 4 o'clock in the morning, and then turn up the next day and go, fuck, we were cool last night. And you just go... And I think, what I think it's been really good over the years is I've seen sort of situations where, and again...
Yeah, Bruce Finley, for example. There's a name for you.
I do actually remember situations where you kind of look at it and you're out. I mean, I don't spend a lot of time in London. We never did, and never did. It's kind of being in Scotland, which is a very pleasant part of promoting, because you're kind of away from that London bollocks that goes on. It really was nonsense, and you can be just kind of, you can go out and have a nice night out with a band, and it's not really sort of related to who they're seen with and where they're seen and all that kind of stuff, so which is really good. But I have sort of had occasions where we've had record label people, and I'm sorry, Bruce, I should give names, but I'm actually terrible at remembering people's names. But I do actually remember it when being with the band and a manager in a club, and in the corner was the guy from the record label who'd come up because he thought he should hang out with the band for a little while, and he was an absolute gibbering wreck. He was just totally off his chump, far too much coke and drink and all that kind of stuff. It was a gibbering wreck, and they were like, oh, look at him and all that kind of stuff. I was going, yeah, worrying that he's responsible for all your record sales, and you can see the manager looking, going, yeah.
I always really struggled with that world, because I wasn't particularly clean living, but I was into punk rock and into raving and things. And you go into the London record industry, and suddenly all these people like doing loads of coke, almost because they felt like they had to, because it was part of the legend of working in a record company. It was all a bit pathetic.
I know it sounds a bit daft as well, but I mean, do you think that a lot of those people they weren't really into music?
Yeah, they weren't. Well, okay. What's into music? This is a sort of interesting thing about being a promoter and that kind of stuff. Being into music. I'm into music. I'd like to think I'm into music. I've been promoting now for 30 something or other years, so I must be into it. Otherwise, what the fuck am I doing? But the reality of it is that what being into music. What I want to do about being into music, and what's important to me is that's a kind of spooky. What I see my job as is that when there's an artist that we're working with, my job is to make sure I help move their career on. That's being into music. That's what really means being into music. It's helping people out, doing a good job, making sure their posters are out, making sure their tickets get sold, all that kind of stuff. That's really being into music. Going out with a band till 4 o'clock in the morning and getting fucked up is not into music. That's into being like part of the scene and all that kind of stuff, and that's just bullshit.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I encountered a lot of people that didn't know much about music. They didn't have any passion for the actual music. I mean, obviously, people have different tastes, but
usually the people who spend you most of the time telling you they are.
Yeah, and it's interesting for me to see the people that have survived, because you've talked about the ones that have how few people that are still really really working in recorded music, and the ones that I still see are the ones that still have a passion for it. I mean, it used to be commented upon if someone took over at a record company that this person was a music man, and it's like, well, you're the boss of a company. That's what the company does, and yeah, it's an industry where they saw it worthy of comment that person actually liked music and had a passion for it.
You had to be completely determined to survive during that period, and I was very fortunate in that I was taught by some really good, passionate people who understood what it was really about, like a guy called Gordon Campbell, who started my college course that I first started on. I worked with John Lee Hooker's former manager, and it was all about taking care of business, not fucking your artist, doing the best you could possibly do. And that is what it's really about.
Was that like fucking in a biblical sense, or?
No, it's like not doing a shoddy job for them and going the extra mile at all times. You know? But maybe some of that could go on as well. Who knows?
We've obviously talked about the infrastructure around it and the different roles, but for an artist, for musicians, how do you see the situation now compared to 10 years ago?
What's changed is, I mean, and again, I see these as positive things. What's changed is people's access to music is so much simpler, quicker, easier, and direct, that basically the opportunities for an artist to be seen and heard is actually, I mean, compared to what it was 10 years ago, is light years ahead of it. You know, we're in a completely different place. The first time I ever really saw that happen was doing Arctic Monkeys in King Tut's, where they hadn't released a single thing, nothing. They hadn't released a note on any description whatsoever. They played King Tut's, sold it out, and people stood in the front and sung every word to every song. And it's just like, where are they getting it from? But it was all online stuff and all the sharing of tracks and bits and pieces and other live stuff, and people were so dedicated to it they could do it. And then once you see that, you go, things have changed massively. There's nobody in control anymore. It's the marketplace is now in control of the product rather than the other way around, and that's actually really good. That's actually positive. I like that.
I think from a musician's point of view, it's important to remember that it was actually never easy to make money, because if you were in that major label system, you were undoubtedly unrecouped, and they were taking all your money anyway. So there were always very, very few people who made a decent living out of music as musicians over the long term. At least what you've got now is that you can be in control of your own career. You can talk directly to your fans, and you can, try and build something that's meaningful and long-lasting. And okay, not that many people do it as a full-time career, but they can find fans who are really into what they do all over the world, and as long as you're actually good at what you do, the opportunities are amazing.
The only downside is that the speed at which things come and go now is startling. I do a lot of hip-hop acts, rap acts from America, and the speed at which that artist can be suddenly worth 2,500 people and then suddenly worth like 100 people is incredible. It's months. It's measured in months. They suddenly arrive, do really good, and sometimes it's not they're actually bad artists. It's just that the next thing has arrived. It's all over social media. It's shared and distributed really quickly, and the artist that was right now is suddenly not anymore. And that used to take 2 or 3 years. It now can take 2 or 3 months, and that's a shocking sort of thing. And that makes it very difficult for an artist. There's a whole sort of year after year in the last sort of 4 or 5 years, I've had artists who you would have thought it was going like this. It was all seemed to be going like that, and then suddenly it's just evaporated. If I'd gone on sale at this point, I would have sold out and it would have been fine. But instead, it was 2 months later, I went and sell that point, and it's just gone off the cliff.
And obviously, there are still people that are very much in a position to help musicians, so help them rise above the noise, let's say, because everyone can put something out. In every digital store in the world, but to actually draw people's attention to that requires a lot of work and often a lot of expertise. So there are still people that are these kind of gatekeepers, and you've worked for Record of the Day for years as well as working for FineTunes. So you're working for a publication that 5 days a week tips one act, tips a song to the industry, but you're sitting here on a sofa having a beer, and you book Tea in the Park. again, you're sitting on the sofa having a beer. Oh no, you're not. You're having that really complicated drink, but it's the point remains the same. It's just a different drink. The one thing that I see has really changed as well is the access. I mean, if you went to in the city, it would cost hundreds of pounds, which is the main music business event, and artists that were playing at it would have to hang around in the lobby because they couldn't get in anywhere else. We charge for wide days, but something like Go North is free, and again, it's that sort of similar. It's a similar thing where the people that are actually placing music in films, the people that are booking the festivals or doing the tip sheets or any of those things are actually. There doesn't seem to be this barrier anymore. I mean, do you find that you find yourself in a situation much more now where artists are able to just come up and speak to you or know who you are?
Yeah, the barriers have gone, and again, that's a healthy thing. I mean, they're kind of. I think there's no sort of thing where you used to be kind of in or out of the industry. You were kind of part of it or you weren't. It was a bit of often a boys' club, which always used to amaze me for an industry that was supposed to be really sort of cool and all that kind of stuff. They're so male dominated, it was ridiculous. And I think what's changed is that that access to get into the industry has now changed massively, and it's a lot easier. And the lines are a lot more blurred because it used to be, you're kind of in the record label working, or you were in amongst the core of it, or you just weren't, and you were kind of outside of that, and it was very hard to gain access. Now, if you don't gain access, or if somebody sort of like restricts your access, you can just do it yourself, and that's a really healthy thing. And it stops that old boys club thing that used to go on, I think, in a big way. And it's like anybody can start a record label if they want to now, and genuinely can actually start one rather than
I think unfortunately there's a dark side to it as well. At Record of the Day, we run the annual awards for music journalism and PR, where we celebrated the people who really would help break acts and would put themselves behind them and move it forward, or the magazines or the newspapers. And actually last year we didn't hold that event because the music press was in such a desperate state, and most even really experienced, really talented journalists can no longer make a living out of it. And all this democracy and all this instant access on the internet has a downside. There's no doubt about it, because you may have been featured on 400 blogs, but there's only 2 people reading each one of them some of the time. And there were elements of the old system where you had these gatekeepers and these voices that you trusted that have gone. Thank God it's still existing in radio to some extent. I think that still has its power.
So who are the gatekeepers now then?
The general public.
Yeah, the gatekeepers are being able to prove that you've got a following, be that by likes on your Facebook page, or selling out tours, or showing that in this world where you can monitor everything, especially on social media, that you have got a genuine audience that's following what you do, not just someone who's backing you.
But I mean, presumably to break into that, that's one thing with radio. You get something on radio or playlisted, then that's a kind of shortcut to getting to the public. You can have all sorts of social media, but it doesn't necessarily mean that people like you.
We are still immensely fortunate in this country that we have the BBC, which they don't have in other countries, and they will take a punt on you. They will give you nighttime specialist play, and that's immensely powerful, and we need to treasure it because it's fantastic.
You have to go to sort of America and see what it's like trying to break an act in America through the radio stations to appreciate just how good Radio 1 is. And everybody there's always this thing about, they kind of, that they hold the keys and all that kind of stuff in it. But to be honest, for a public service radio, they are really open. They are really quite good about sort of, the Zane Lowe, whether you love him or hate him, the stuff that he plays, the way he champions new music, all those kind of stuff, that is really good. There just isn't.
It's not as good as Vic.
No.
Just for the record. But that's Scotland. I mean, for the UK wide, I mean, I think it is a fair point. It's also with Six Music and the fact that you are able to have something
the
that's
fact
not
that it hasn't
necessarily
got a
internet.
commercial background. That's the deal. There doesn't. If even in college radio and stuff in the US, which is slightly liberated, there's still got to be a nod to the advertisers and what they want to hear and who they want to be listening to the radio station. You go to commercial radio, and in reality, what decides what's getting played is what's going to attract the right public for them to sell advertising to strong advertisers. So it's just kind of it's got a different basis to it altogether. To have what we have in the UK is stunning. It's really good, and it's one of the core reasons why the UK industry is so innovative and so good at developing new acts. It's really important.
So, final question, where do you see things being in 10 years' time, or even in 2 years, if you can't look that far ahead?
That's a real stumper, that is. And I don't see things as being radically different. I see that media will be as it is now, instant and pervasive, and everyone will always have their heads stuck in their phones, and that's probably not going to change, except it'll be on a pair of glasses instead. In a kind of nice way, the thing that's never changed is good bands have always been good, bad bands have always been shit. That hasn't changed over 10 years, and it's not going to change over the next years. And if you want to make it as a musician, you need to rehearse really hard, find an audience, and be incredibly passionate about what you do, and that will never change.
Dave, with the live industry, I mean, one thing I've noticed is just how many smaller festivals have emerged, or, I hate using the word boutique festival, but, let's call them smaller festivals that seem to appeal to different segments. I mean, do you think that's going to continue?
Yes, because what's making that work is that it's easier to connect like-minded people than it used to be. So, things like Facebook and Twitter and all that kind of stuff, it's much easier for like-minded people, unless you were all in the same city. It used to be, 10 years ago, it was quite hard to kind of get that sense of talking about particular artists and communicating about it. Now, you can be in any country in the world and discuss about an artist. So it's easier for like-minded people to talk about and grow something. So what the boutique festivals are doing is they're representing that sort of togetherness of a group of people who are into a particular genre of music or a particular style of festival. It's much easier to talk to them. What's been difficult is that often means a smaller number of people, and we tried to get the Connect Festival off the ground, which I think was very successful for 2 years, but the big problem with Connect was that you just couldn't do quite enough people to make it actually financially viable to carry on. And that was a real shame, because I think actually from our point of view, it was one of the most fun we had putting a festival together, doing that kind of thing. And I think we'd love to do it again. The opportunity will come up again for us to do that. So I think the boutique festivals continue. I think what will happen is festivals will have more of a specific face to them and a specific feel to them, because you're able to create that and you're able to get all those people together for it. I think people are travelling further now to festivals. I think we realise that Tiana Park's part of a European festival set up, and people go to all around Europe to different festivals and to different sort of shades of stuff, and people travel a lot more than they used to. And what's restricted it in the last little while has been finances, money, really. It's people are finding it tight, so less people are doing it, less people are being adventurous, and less people are spending money. But as things get better, which they inevitably will, I think that will grow again, because people will have the money to spend and will be able to afford to do it, and the festivals will be able to afford to exist. I look forward to that, because personally, I drive down to Latitude and spend a weekend there with my family, because I actually really like that. It's terribly middle class and all that kind of stuff, but it's right up my street. So.
And Olaf, I'm not going to let you go without some comments about Wide Days and Born to be Wide and things that you do, because people who build enthusiasm and community and try and make an effort to put something back, especially in the context of Wide Days, I think are just immensely valuable. And that particular event that you've been doing for a few years now, all the people I know from the international industry who go to it love it and are totally enthused about it, and everyone here needs to continue to support it and be proud of it, because it's a really awesome thing. So there you go.
Yeah, so on that, thank you very much, Dave.